Let's look at linear equations. I'm going to show you the different types of linear equations that can be solved, and then let's look at the steps for solving them. So there are three types of linear equations you can solve for. The first kind of equation that can be solved is a conditional equation, and that is where there is just one solution. The second equation you can solve is the identity equation, and that's where you have infinite solutions and your solution set will be all real numbers. When you go to solve the identity equation, you'll end up with 0 equals 0. So 0 always equals 0. You could, I guess, end up with something like 1 equals 1, or 3 equals 3, or x equals x even. But anything you put into the equation would work. So that's why it's the identity equation. Okay. And the third equation that you have is an inconsistent equation, and this is where you have no solution. When you go to solve an inconsistent equation, you'll end up with something either like 0 equals 5, or 2 equals 3. Okay? If you, for some reason, had let's look at the conditional equation. If you had 0 equals x, then that means x equals 0, and that is not inconsistent. That is conditional. That means that you do have one solution, and that solution is 0. But if you have all of your variables go away, then that means that you have no solution, as long as one side does not equal the other. Okay, let's go over the steps for solving a linear equation, and then we'll look at some examples of how to solve them. So the first step for solving a linear equation is to simplify the algebraic expression on both sides of the equation. So on each side of the equation, you either need to distribute or add like terms on each side of the equation with each expression. So the second step after you simplify the algebraic expressions on both sides is to collect all the variable terms on one side of the equation and all of the constants, or the numbers without a variable, on the other side of the linear equation. So just bring everything with a variable over to one side, everything else on the other side. So step 3 would be to isolate the variable by multiplying or dividing the constant. So if the variable has, for example, 4x, you would divide both sides by 4 to get the divide both sides by 4 to get the variable all by itself. If there is a fraction in front, if there is a fraction, you'd multiply by the reciprocal. So if your constant is being multiplied by 3/4, then you multiply both sides of the equation by 4/3, and that cancels the fraction out. After you solve for isolate the variable, then you have the solution. So step 4 would be to just check your solution. So you just plug your solution back into the original equation. Let's look at our first example. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to simplify each side of the equation. So I want to bring this 11x and the 6x together, but first let's distribute that negative sign through. So we've got here 11x minus 6x, and distribute the negative to the minus 5x becomes plus 5 equals 40. Okay. Now we're going to combine the 11x minus 6x. They're on the same side, so we follow that operation. 11 minus 6 is 5x. And let's subtract the 5 over to the other side of the equation. So 5x equals 35, so x would be 7. And that will be our final answer. If you're unsure if you got the right answer or not, you can plug that 7 back into the equation. So I have 11 times 7, which is 77, minus 6 times 7 minus 5, so 6 times 7 is 42. 42 minus 5, which is 37. So 77 minus 37 is equal to 40, so it checks out. All right, this next example is a little bit different. You'll notice that there are fractions. So the first thing you want to do when your equation has a fraction is you'll want to multiply through by the least common denominator. If you remember what the least common denominator is, if you take a look at the numbers that are in the denominator, we have 6, 3, and 4. You want to find the multiple that is the smallest number that those all multiply into. So 6, you have 6 or 12. 3, you have 3, 6, 9, 12. And 4, you have 4, 8, and 12. So 12 is the first number that all of them have a multiple of. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply through by 12. And what we'll do is we'll multiply 12 by each term in the entire equation. You have to do it on the left side and the right side, and it has to be every single term. So here I have x plus 3 over 6 times 12 equals 2/3 times 12 plus x minus 5 over 4 times 12. And then we simplify each of those fractions. The denominator must cancel out if you've done this problem right. So 12 and 6 reduce to 2. 2 over 3, and then we reduce times 12. You reduce that. 3 goes into 12 4 times, and then 4 goes into 12 3 times. So we end up with the fraction 2 times x plus 3 equals 2 times 4, which is 8, plus 3 times x minus 5. We are going to distribute and combine like terms. So we have 2x plus 6. Make sure you distribute that 2 all the way through. Equals 8 plus 3 times x is 3x, and 3 times negative 5 is negative 15. So let's combine like terms. I personally like to bring the smaller x where the bigger x is, so that I don't have to deal with negatives. So I'm going to subtract that 2x. And then I have 8 minus 15. Actually, let's do this step first. We end up with 6 equals 8 minus 15 is 7. So let's add the 7 over. And we end up with, here, 13 equals 3x. So we're just going to divide both sides by 3, and x equals 13 thirds. And we are good. All right, let's look at one more quick example here. We have to distribute both sides, distribute the number through to both sides. So we've got here 6x minus 15. And on this side we need to distribute this 2 through, so we get 6 plus 6x. Now let's combine like terms, so we're going to subtract the 6x over. And let's add this 15 over to this side. So we end up 6x minus 6x is 0. And 6 plus 15 is 21. Since 0 cannot equal 21, we will say there is no solution. So when you have a solution that ends up like that, that's what we get.